Well, good morning and welcome to the latest session of the Kirklees Democracy Commission's Witness Evidence Sessions. We're joined this morning by Professor Cristina Leston-Bandeira, pronounced that incorrectly of course, Professor of Politics, University of Leeds, one of the strongest advocates in many ways about how parliaments engage with the general public in different ways. Christina's work has focused a lot on breaking those boundaries down and looking at what public engagement means in the 21st century in terms of democratic politics. We've invited you here today, particularly because of your work with the Speaker of the House of Commons Commission on digital democracy, but also on your wider experience in the way in which parliaments are seeking to engage with the general public and build political engagement and democratic participation. As you may well know, the Kirklees Democracy Commission has been set up by Kirklees Council at a time when politics is very much at the forefront of the public mind. We've had the European Union referendum this summer, which has energised the demos and has got people talking about politics in ways which I've rarely seen before in this country. And also that the ongoing constitutional reform of governance across England and the United Kingdom more widely means that there are multiple questions about that relationship between the citizen and government at various levels. And in that sense, I think that the Kirklees Democracy Commission is asking the right questions at the right time. One of the things that Whitehall and Westminster may well be guilty of is not thinking about the implications of regional devolution and of localism and other agendas on local democracy. And in many ways, that is why I think that the Democracy Commission is coming from the right position, which is coming from a local level rather than thinking about things from the top down. This morning we're joined by Councillor Jenna Wilson and Councillor Andrew Marchington. One of the most pleasing parts of the Democracy Commission is that all four political parties within Kirklees Council have not only bought into the Commission itself, but also are supporting our work. Over the summer we've been engaging with local citizens in various ways and also with stakeholders, and at the moment we're going through a process of evidence giving. So thank you very much for your time this morning, it's much appreciated. I think probably a good way to start is to maybe discuss a little bit your own work, and particularly the work with the Digital Democracy Commission, and think about whether you could give us an overview of some of the conclusions it came to regarding digital literacy and engagement, and also maybe its implications for local democracy and local government.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you very much for listening to my views. I'll say right from the beginning that, as you know, I'm not an expert on local democracy or local government. So my work has been mainly on Parliament, national parliaments mainly. But obviously all these issues are related, and I actually think that at local government, at local level, is where you have the opportunities to do a lot of the things that nationally you can't do. There's obviously lots of issues into that in terms of culture, and in this country it's very much a culture based in Westminster and national politics, and it's very difficult to counter that. So compare with places like France, where there's much more culture of local government and local politics. So all of these questions are interlinked, but my research has been mainly at national level. The Digital Democracy Commission that the Speaker of the House of Commons set up worked very much as the method was the message, which I think in some ways is what you're doing here with the Democracy Commission, Kirklees, which is a really good idea, thinking about how do people connect with politics, but actually going out there and talking to the people and talking to a variety of groups. The Digital Democracy Commission went to lots and lots of different groups, from sort of more what you'd call, say, elite groups, to people who'd never even thought about politics. We had one of our workshops, one of my colleagues was in the fish and chip shop in Sheffield. Another workshop we had was with adults with learning difficulties, workshops in schools, so a wide range of things. But what I found was really interesting was whoever you spoke to, whether it was people, say, in the city in London, or academics up in Newcastle, or the fish and chip shop, there was a clear message that came through across all of that. And so you could summarise those in three of them, really. One, which I think is really important, and I know I'm seeming like a person of digital, but digital is because I study it, doesn't mean that I think it's actually a solution for everything. And if something that came across very well in the Commission with people we talk to, a variety of evidence we took, is that digital does not sort processes. So if you involve digital into a process that doesn't work, the digital is not going to sort it out. If anything, it might make it worse. And we could talk about examples of that. One thing that I'm very involved at the moment in terms of my research is e-petitions. You may know there's a new system of e-petitions in Westminster. And one of the things that I'm interested in that is looking actually at the processes behind that. One of the problems of the Downing Street petitions, for instance, is that in my view it was just a website. There was no process behind it. And if anything, that raises expectations. People think, I can have a voice, I can send things, but actually nothing happens to it. And that's worse than just not giving that opportunity. So that's one of the main conclusions, that digital does not sort out processes by itself in any way. It's just a tool. It's a tool that we have here in the 21st century, and absolutely we should use it. Absolutely we should be creative in how we use it, but it does not sort out processes. And I'll come back to that. But to me, digital, it opens paths in sort of three dimensions. One is access to data, to information. So it's about information. Another one is about interaction and accessibility. Another one is about participation, stroke decision making. So there's three different paths of how it can help to promote, encourage, enhance democracy, but it doesn't do it by itself. And then the second one was that people engage into politics through issues, not through politics by itself. So we have had, as you said earlier, a very invigorating summer, because people got involved in the decisions in the political process, in the referendum, and then a variety of other sort of events that have happened recently. That does feel like it's a more revigorating environment, and being great in many ways. That's to do with the issues, is to do with the fact that people really did care about whether we're part of the EU or not. And people might think, well, they cared for the wrong reasons, they don't have the information. But I mean, in some ways, that's by the by. People cared about it, and sometimes actually political decision or political engagement is not a rational process. And I think that's important to understand, that people don't necessarily engage into politics to achieve something. There's also very much sort of an emotional aspect to it, almost an identity aspect to it. And it's about who you are, what you care about. Earlier you were talking about Derbyshire, how suddenly, you might have lived in Manchester most of your life, but there's still a link there with that identity. And those things really matter. And I think the EU referendum is a good example of that, on how many people voted to leave or to remain, not necessarily because they looked at all the pros and cons of being members or not being members. Some people did, but maybe people didn't either. They felt, well, I have no association with the EU whatsoever, or I absolutely want to be part of that project. And it's just, I'm just picking up on this example, that it's about issues and identity. It's not necessarily about rational processes of decision making. And it's definitely not just about formal process of participation, that people engage in politics when they're interested, and that's through the issues. So that was the second one. And then finally, the final main conclusion was go where the people are. And this is particularly important for Westminster, obviously, which is down in London, which is very difficult for most people to go to. And it also has the idea of creating an effect of the bubble effect, that people perceive that they're not part of it, they can't reach it, even if in reality you could go and talk to someone in there quite easily. Although even having said that, there's a cost of transport. If you live in Hull like I do, it's not everyone can do that unless you plan ahead. There's lots of constraints in between. And so a very strong idea that came across was go where the people are. And of course digital can help to do that. Digital can help to facilitate that. Although having said that, there's what I know better, as I said at the beginning, is Parliament's, what Parliament's do in terms of education and engagement. And there are lots of initiatives of trying to reach out to people digitally. An example which might surprise you a little bit, I don't know, of a chamber that is highly active in that area is the Brazilian Parliament, both the upper chamber and the lower chamber. The lower chamber, the Chamber of Deputies in Brazil in particular, look at their programme, look at the education facilities that they have, resources from young people, from little 7-year-olds to teenagers to sixth formers to actually staff development training for teachers, lots and lots and lots of resources. But a lot of it is digital. I don't know if you've ever been to Brazil, if you know anything about Brazil. It's a huge country, absolutely huge. The Chamber of Deputies is in Brasilia, and Brazil is in the middle of nowhere. It's been a city created for the Parliament. It's a very interesting.
It's my dream, the most beautiful, brutalist architecture in the world in one city.
It's an amazing city, and it's amazing architecture. All of it's symbolic. I could go on and on about it.
So could I.
But no one lives there other than people who work for government of Parliament or civil servants, and that gives you straight away, it shows you the problem. And although they do have some subsidies for people to go in there, they actually reach a lot of these programmes. And they do make a lot of effort. They do have lots of staff who work on this. It's not actually that huge. They've got an amazing platform called E-Democracy, so like E-Democracy. They've had it since 2009. It's very complex. People can submit ideas for legislation. They can comment on legislation. They can do all sorts of things. But if you look at the amount of comments that they get, and if you look proportionally to the population, it's actually really low. It's still, admirable that they're doing that, and they're doing that with other things. But the point in here is that digital doesn't necessarily overcome a lot of, reaching out to people. Coming back to this country, in Westminster, from all places, sort of always seen as very centralised. When they start developing their programme, 2008-2009 of outreach, I don't know if you're familiar with that programme. So the outreach it's got different variants to it now, but it's this idea of go out there rather than expecting people coming to Westminster. So they have regional officers across the country. You'll have your own regional officer for this region here, and they do workshops, seminars, things locally. So they work with local charities, community groups, schools, universities. I sometimes do things in Leeds or I've done in Hull, and it's been with the outreach officer. And Scotland does really interesting things in that area. Don't know if you're familiar with what they do, but again they also go. They have an initiative which is the Parliament Day, where the idea is the Parliament goes where the people are. So they'll have the presiding officer and a team of people will go to somewhere else that is not Edinburgh, usually linked, say, to a committee looking at a piece of legislation, for instance, and wants to hear from the local people in terms of evidence.
I think David Cameron also tried the sort of the Parliament Roadshow, didn't he?
Yeah, but
it was more of a public relations exercise.
It's not what I like about all these examples, actually, it's examples that people don't necessarily hear about, but they're actually genuine examples where people
we used to have the government office under the previous governments, didn't we? Which is our connection with central government.
Yeah. So these are just examples about going where the people are. So there's different ways of doing it. Digital can help with that, but it's not the end all of how you reach out to people. Obviously, if you've read the report of the Digital Democracy Commission, it's online still today, open up report. There's, I think, 34 recommendations in there. There's lots of little ideas about how the House of Parliament, mainly House of Commons, can implement some of these issues. But ultimately, I would say those are the three ideas. Digital doesn't sort out processes. Connect with people through issues and go where the people are.
Yes, many of those ideas that came out of the Speakers Commission do relate to local government as much as they do to national. And certainly the report is one of those things that one of the documents will be drawing on as part of our work, because there's much richness in that. One of the things that's come up in our engagement with the public has been, as you identify, that digital democracy, social media platforms can enrich democracy, but they are not the panacea to its ills, and they can't replace traditional forms of engagement, councillors going out and routing citizens through surgeries and that more banal personal role. And one of the questions which has emerged really is how do you synchronise what's happening digitally with what's happening in a more traditional format? Because some of those things don't naturally sync together that easily. I don't know whether at a national level you consider how that relationship is somehow made more coherent for citizens.
I think that there's two different dimensions in there. One is about how do you integrate, say, participatory tools, more participation from the public into representative institutions, which is one discussion. Another one is how do you use digital to do that. And starting with the first one, I think one of the issues that we have now in 2016, so the 21st century issue, is exactly how do we integrate participatory democracy into representative democracy, being that representative democracy has to be the basis for our legitimacy, for our processes, whether it's nationally, whether it's locally. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge that our society in the 21st century is not the same society of the 20th century, where a lot of our institutions and processes were developed. And I think it's those institutional processes that need to adapt to different reality.
Can you just follow that through? So what sort of processes represent good processes for participatory democracy?
Yeah.
And then let's have a chat think about that, and then potentially talk about how digital could help to improve those, because I think that seems to be the right way of doing it, doesn't it?
Yeah. So participatory democracy, there's actually, I mean, I don't know how many examples you've looked at, so there's actually quite a few examples of local government, and these things actually tend to work better at the local government level, because you know better the population, they're nearer. Things like participatory budgets, have you discussed those in here? So those are very popular, but also mini public consultations, and the key thing in those activities that make them work are that they are specific to an issue. There's something actually specific that people are going to look at, and that they are at early stages of decision. Because if you do it very late stage of decision, it's far more difficult to do, because straight away party politics are locked into their only party policies, and it's much more difficult to do it. The public is much more likely to be disappointed, and is much more likely to be ignored, to be honest. Whereas if it's at earlier stages, then they can be listened to, but also that's when it matters most, talking to the people, because they can bring you genuine experiences, their feelings about things. And I've done a study recently on the public reading stage, which was an initiative that the House of Commons had, where the public could comment on a bill. So there was a bill, there was the Children and Families Act that was passed in 2014, and in 2013 they had a public reading stage for 2 weeks. People could comment and give their views, and there's over 1,000 comments there. We included them all. Some harrowing comments in there. People expressing, really difficult situations in their families to deal with, children who need, respite care, that sort of thing, or people going through very difficult separations. Really quite dramatic situations. But all of those comments are very, very rich, but they're very rich to inform how you're going to do policy. Once you've already set out, this is the bill, it's much more difficult than to fit in and to integrate those views. And then to explain to the person, no, we can't do that. I know you're having a really difficult situation, but we've already gone this way. So early is better. The other thing we also found was that the complexity of doing legislation, and also how boring it is, to be honest. The processes. People are not only interested in that, they're interested in the issues, they're passionate about the issues. They don't want to talk about the 70 other schedules, clauses that need to be go through.
You mentioned about the participatory budget idea. We spoke to somebody on Friday last week, one of the commissioners, who said he felt that actually having a participatory budget set people up for disappointment because you may have, depending on certain age groups, for example, a young family in their 30s, their importance, let's say maybe parks and schools, maybe a couple in their 60s and 70s, obviously it's looking more towards social care. How do you mentioned as well about the Westminster petition where it goes in, you're setting people up for disappointment because nothing happens. Do you think we run that risk with a participatory budget?
I think the risk of disappointing the public is always a risk is going to be there, because one of the things of politics is that we can't please everyone. We have to go through the majority, let's say. We can't have a policy that fits 60 different million of people. But what we can do is show that we have listened to people, and you have to explain why we need to make a specific decision in this way, because overall, for the common good, is fairer to everyone.
I think that's where we fall down a lot in politics, actually, the feedback to people.
The feedback is really important. And so if people take the time to give their comments, they want to know what's happened to those comments. And there's been studies on petitions. A colleague of mine at Glasgow has done studies on the Scottish Parliament petition system, and he found that even when petitioners did not get what they were expecting, what they wanted, if they felt they had been fairly listened to, their trust on the institution rose. They felt more confident.
I can see that.
So it's a conversation rather than a sort of one-off exchange. That's interesting, isn't it?
Can I just come back to the participatory budget though? Because there's been so many experiments on this. There's lots of different models. One thing that some councils have done is it's not the whole of the budget, it's determining specific small pockets of budget, saying, so this is the budget that you're going to decide, which is still going to disappoint people, because some people might want to do a park, someone else might do something else. But that's that conversation, education about ultimately we have to live with each other. We can't all do what we want to do. And actually I think that's more and more difficult because we're in a very individualistic society. And I think there's a lot of work to be done.
Well, that's interesting, because that does address the issue about, we were talking about the other week about participants. So if it sticks to an issue, you might even set the envelope if it's early enough, and you can, there's room to actually deal with the consequences of engaging with. So if you've got different views coming across which are legitimate, then the process needs to be able to accommodate that. Even if it's in part, it might not do everything that people want, but actually to feed back and say, right, out of our discussions we've managed to do this.
And sometimes something that we need to think about also is that doesn't happen only when we get to adult life. We should do more of that in schools. And young people actually, quite often they already do that at school, actually, we don't know much, but I think they need to do more. Like, you can't, if there's a school with 350 pupils, you can't please all 350 pupils. We have to make a decision, and it might be a decision that you might not like, but it's better for the whole of the school. And
as part of citizenship education years ago, we developed an exercise that was quite, about a planning issue, and asking young people to put themselves in different roles, and it fits in with the stuff they do. It's about arguments for and against, and actually seeing another person's point of view and understanding that. And that work quite, it's quite tight and specific, and it seemed to sort of help them to understand some of the issues that councillors as representatives had to go through.
Exactly, and I think we need to do more of that in schools. And if young people grow up with the actually having lived through the experience of having to make decisions and realising that you can't all win with the decisions. No one has got to lose, but there's reasons for that.
The other thing we try to do in our area when we had a small is actually give young people some budgets, real budgets, and actually find a project. I think Bolster Moor was a great one. They'd actually wanted to tidy up an area or do something in an area, so there's money available for them to. So they'd done all the engagement with, and actually coming up with solutions and stuff, and there was money to back that. It was relatively small amounts of money to do that, but it actually was.
That sounds really good. Yeah.
Well, the initiative is My Country, My Vote, which has been Kirklees Council, where we've actually been getting people to design their own projects and then go out campaigning on them. So they have to appeal to their own students, and then they come to council with the winning idea, and then the council hopefully will feed back to the young people. That's that whole process.
That's really important. The feedback.
It's a very interesting sort of way of approaching it. Just to sort of move on in some senses, because that opens up a lot of questions I think that we want to go and drill into a little bit more in depth. One of the things when we engage with citizens in Kirklees is that they felt there were too few opportunities to engage in politics and to get involved in decision making outside of voting in formal elections. And we know the well-worn cliche that we only see politicians at election time. That there's this conversation between citizens and elected representatives is far weaker outside of that election cycle. I just wonder whether, from your own experience in various projects, you could say a little bit about why you think citizens feel this sense of dislocation, and also, what we in the Democracy Commission might want to consider in starting to resolve some of the discrepancy.
I think in there, there's different things going into that. One is that people do tend to think of formal politics in this country as Westminster politics, and they tend to think about voting in general elections. Although, like if you live in Glasgow, the amount of times you actually have to go and vote for something they've had like 2 referendums, European Parliament, Scottish Parliament, general election. And in reality, there's many more moments today, 2016, to vote than there was, say, in 1964. There's just many more opportunities. We vote for far more. That has the effect that people may feel that not all elections are as important, and you just turn out for the ones that are important. And in there, the culture is really important in determining, rationalising which one you go and vote for. And there's still, although we're talking about at the beginning, local government actually has quite strong remit of various areas that they can act. People still have very much a perception in this country that it's all about national politics, and they don't necessarily differentiate. So I was telling you that I'm working with the Petitions Committee at the moment in Westminster, and one of the things which is interesting, just reflects this, is the amount of petitions they receive, which are actually local government level, very clearly, really clearly. And people just don't even.
Well, we've got hospital reorganisation in our area at the moment, and there is an online petition about that, because we believe that ultimately the decisions made by the Secretary of State. So there's local decision making, but it still has to. The Secretary of State could have the ultimate say on it. So,
but the other thing about coming back to why people feel that, we also have to think about that we are in a very different society today from when representative institutions were set up, and people do expect to have a say. There's much more an expectation to have a say, and people have much more access to information, and straight away they feel that they can be experts on things. They can make their points about different things. However, and I think that's a very important point to always remember, this is not everyone, and I don't know how you select the people you went to talk to, but there are some people who are highly want to be engaged, want to be involved, want to do things. There's lots of people who really not bothered at all, and I think we always have to remind ourselves of that. There was a very interesting study recently by Paul Webb looking at who are the dissatisfied Democrats in this country, and he showed how there was the dissatisfied Democrats, people who love participatory democracy, who love direct democracy, who want to be involved in all that, and they think that politicians, they don't give them much credit for anything, we should do things in a different way. And then there's the stealth Democrats, who are the people who just don't want to do anything with any of that, don't want to be involved, don't want to have a say. Now, that's not to say that we think, oh well, it's fine then, let's not do anything, because none of these problems have got easy solutions, and I think it's about providing channels and opportunities, particularly the opportunities for different types of audiences, whether it's a young people audience, whether it's an audience that would never engage with politics. But you have to think about that audience differently to the dissatisfied Democrats, because they're not the same as the stealth Democrats. Having said all those things, all those caveats, there are ways of involving people. I don't know, the detail of what you're already doing here, but you've mentioned an online petition. But there's ideas like the participatory budgets, there's the mini publics, there's consultations, so there's lots of simple tools that don't have to be suddenly we only do this. And actually pilots are really good to try things out. A pilot, this public reading stage that I mentioned, the bill where people commented, that was a pilot. Unfortunately they haven't done it anymore, but hopefully they will do. But doing things, sort of experimenting, seeing what works, what doesn't work, but always thinking about the issues early on in the process, and of course the feedback to the people is really important. So,
and these things both enhance that sense of community engagement, that sense of community, citizen and community, and also the quality of decision making itself. In your experience beyond that, because these are obviously very much initiatives that go out to the public, one of the ways in which that relationship changes, of course, is the public trying to come into the institution and look at how the council makes decisions and scrutinises them. And I wonder whether, in your experience, that scrutiny role that some members of the general public certainly want to be part of is more problematic, or whether it can be opened up and made easier for citizens.
You mean whether digital can make it more problematic?
Yeah, and just in general, actually, in a more general sort of sense, with your work at a national level, whether there are lessons to be learned for the way local government works.
Well, the scrutiny, the first step for scrutiny is the access to information, isn't it? Is the information out there? Can people see what's going on in here? Web streaming is one example, and minutes available, all of those things. But then there's another step to that, which is, for a long time, I've spoken to so many officials who said to me, "But all the information's out there. It's all out there. They're all out there. They just need to search for it." And I think, but that is a problem. Is that there's lots of things. I mean, I'm not even going to talking about the digitally excluded, let's say, people who don't use digital at all, because for those it's even more difficult. Even if they have digital skills, they might not have the digital literacy to search for things. But even beyond this, even those with digital, and I teach university students for over 20 years, and they should be the most digitally literate people we have. But there's a difference between what we call, say, thin transparency and thick transparency in terms of explaining information. So one of the things that actually came through a lot in the Digital Democracy Commission was it's not just about giving information, it's giving information in different formats to suit different types of publics. And then there's another side of that, which is the idea of the open data, which is making the data available in a format that other partner organisations can come and present it. So it's not just about the council. There's no reason why a parliament or a council should be the ones presenting all the information. You could have, I don't know, say for instance, a local community very involved in recycling wants to develop an app about where the best place to go recycling, and if the data is all there, easy for them to use, they can match that as digital people.
So digital sharing is an important part.
And then they would make it that their own tool, and people can use it. So the council, the institution, doesn't have to do everything. The information can be there to be used by other people, and that works better because then they present it according to their issues. Again, coming back to the issues.
Can we just explore that into the scrutiny? Because again, we have formal scrutiny. Well, the only formal scrutiny we have is health and social care, but people are expected to be general. You know, it could be any issue coming in place. Whereas I think there's potentially a role for people as like expert citizens. So if you've got an interest in refuse collection and recycling, particular interest, actually there might be an opportunity for you to scrutinise that particular thing. Library, we've had library reorganisation really. Actually, lots of volunteers, lots of friends groups coming up because they've got an interest in things. And I've seen people in our community who've, you know, they're just interested in that because it's like they've come involved and they've helped run it, but actually they have got an understanding of it. So it's this issue-based
It is, yeah. And
thing around scrutinising. Whereas if one of us sits on a scrutiny panel, it's whatever comes. You have to take an interest in social care, the ambulance service, the clinical commissioning groups within that. It's
I mean, again, it's going back to the issues where people are passionate about, isn't it? In one things that I see all the time is people say people were never given evidence or never contacted a formal institution, but suddenly there's something they're really passionate about, and they don't actually understand anything else, but the whole life is about that. And they'll come and talk to you. They'll tell you lots and lots. They'll give you the time because they're passionate about it and they have an expertise that you can't possibly have.
Because that's interesting. Because my perception is Kirklees is quite good at doing consultative. I mean, my wife, years before I was elected, was on the she used to regularly get a survey. She was part of a whatever we used to call a citizens panel, and did that for a period of time, and then somebody else did. But it's about everything, and she was talking about services she didn't use. But again, so if we say to people, we want to focus on recently reconfigured our refuse collection, right? Actually, a group of people about what is your experience of that, and then there's the opportunity for feeding back as well about it, isn't it? Because they can monitor it. What's the user's experience of?
And those community groups, they're so valuable because they've got a knowledge and an experience that you can't possibly have.
Absolutely.
And involving those people through those interests. It's one way of involving, but then you do that, involve them, and they might not recognise, but actually you have been given an opportunity to participate between voting. It's the recognition that you are being involved, but it's not the formal process. And I'm not sure people always, like when you receive that survey, do people think, actually, I'm getting involved, involving the process here?
I think that's part of our role as a politician, because the classic example of that was local transport plan years ago, and I worked community called Longwood, which is a bit out on a limb. I talked. They said we want to see this in the local transport plan. I found that the transport plan was actually altered as a result of that, and it was like a paragraph, one paragraph out of a 100-page document. And they said, "Well, what was the point?" And so he said, "That's the sentence that's changed because of your contribution." And then
that's the feedback.
So that made it worthwhile. But they wouldn't have picked that up unless somebody who'd actually gone through the details and stuff.
And sort of a planning document or a bill or something that we may be familiar to deal with. Most people aren't familiar to deal with it. They don't necessarily see that's my voice. You have to translate. You have to explain.
So skills
that's what it is.
And it's worth investing that time in that
Definitely.
translation.
Definitely.
Thank you. That links into what I was going to say. Actually, I think one of the things we're really guilty of, as soon as you become almost institutionalised, is the language that we use, acronyms, and just the way we speak, and we make things really, really hard for people. It's a turn-off, it's boring. When I was first elected, I got a list through from one of my group, which said which committees you want to be in. It was just acronyms, the whole thing. I had no clue what it was. And that was someone who probably by definition had more interest and knowledge than a lot of people, by the fact I'd gone through the election process twice. So I just think we're really, really guilty of doing that. And as Andrew was saying, you might have a 100-page document with that one sentence that means something to people, but unless you can actually find the time and the interest to actually sit there and wade through it. But even then, we're talking in sort of technocrat speech, and I just think we need to boil it down to the bare basics, including the chamber. But people seem to think the chamber is just theatre, which you can understand why it feels like that, because we'd speak to each other now here and I'd say, oh, great idea, Andrew. But in the chamber, you feel compelled to say, well, I welcome that idea, Councillor Marchington. And it just feels ridiculous to me.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm on a bit of a rant on the question here. Moving it back into a question. But how important do you think it is just to get that language? I do, don't I? Sorry.
It's cathartic. The whole purpose of the Democracy Commission is to sort of,
and
in
that's
some ways,
important.
it's a form of therapy for ourselves. It's democratic therapy.
Sometimes there's a false formality to what we do.
Yeah, there is, yeah.
Some of it's going back to issues around respect, and actually our role is different. We live in and amongst our communities. So I very rarely refer to council such and such in the council chamber. I refer to them by their first name and the same way, because actually it is, and that
normal.
removes the barrier.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
That's just for normal.
To go back to that question and think
Yeah.
about it,
Yeah.
how do we change the vernacular, or how do we translate that very institutionalised vernacular of politics within the council chamber into something which people out there understand, citizens can buy into, I suppose.
I think that the word translating, how do you translate, is a key one, because I think to some extent, I mean, obviously there's huge variation, isn't there, from the House of Commons chamber, where you can't even refer to the other person as you, to
You can't clap either.
you can't clap either, which it sounds counterintuitive, really, to a local government council, which is not like that. Two, we talked about the Brazilian Parliament earlier. In the Brazilian Parliament, it's like a market. If you go to the chamber, it's like a market. Everyone stands up, no one sits down, everyone is talking. You can go in the galleries and shout as much as you want.
I quite like the sound.
I
think our first formal recommendations on the line.
So there's a lot of variation.
Right. Yeah.
I'm actually a bit of a traditional in some ways, in that I think that different roles have different. Originally, I'm a sociologist. That's my first degree, and I think that actually rituals and context are really important. And if you are talking the chamber, you are talking the chamber, and that you are representing the people who've elected you. So I'm not saying you can't refer to the other person as not you or not clap, but I think that is slightly different to a meeting conversation.
Yes, I do agree with that.
And I think that there has to be that legitimacy and that it has to be different. It has to be specific to that context.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean, though, that you don't translate it. Well, obviously, that you don't go to extremes. Like, there's lots of different things you can do in between. But I think it has to be different. But the translating job, I think, is really important. And you call it education, call it leaflets, call it whatever you want to. But explaining the jargon is really important. But for instance, in the university context, we have lots of acronyms. All professions have got acronyms. It's part of the profession. So it would be very difficult not having those. It's about explaining those. And we have the same thing. We've changed our office hours now for our students to academic support hours, I think, in the hope that students understand that's to give them academic support. And will it work? I don't know. It will work if we are really good and give them support, I think. So it's about how we translate that to...
The description is closer to what it's supposed to do.
Yeah,
We've moved from reading weeks to study consolidation weeks.
Yes, and you do those things and thinking, do they understand it better? I don't know. I mean, if you do a good job, I think they probably understand it.
It's a constant process, though. It's a constant process of thinking about that language and how it changes in some ways.
Now, having said that, out of the Digital Democracy Commission, because Westminster is particularly a good example of using language that people don't necessarily understand. So, for instance, division. Why is a vote called division and not just a vote? And that was one in our evidence session. The language issues came through all the time. And one of the things that actually they've been doing, because a lot of these recommendations, they are working on it, and there's lots of things that are changing at the moment. It's really interesting. And one of the things they're developing is the jargon buster, which is something I was very keen. It's actually one of our recommendations. Right. And the jargon buster is actually already there. They're testing it. So if you go to the website, every so often they'll ask you for a survey. Sometimes it's there, sometimes it isn't, so they can test it. And basically, if you put the mouse over a word, say division, a bubble comes up and says division is a vote.
Yeah.
So digital can be used for that translating process. But again, it's not the only thing you should do.
No. But that offers us a very good segue into
Yes.
the second theme, which is particularly about digital democracy and the role of mobile technologies in changing the way we do democracy in many ways to help councillors in that role. And one of the things that has come up is in many ways is how do we make a virtue of those opportunities that digital platforms and the mobile technologies offer, both in terms of councillors and getting some councillors to buy into that, certainly not our two colleagues today, but also then for citizens to buy into the idea that these things are a virtue, they're enhancing, they're enriching local democracy.
It's just so many different ways you can do that, but obviously, I mean, one thing to always bear in mind, I think, even if it's 21st century, 2016, is that a lot of people don't use digital, a lot of people don't use mobile technologies for lots of different reasons. I know a lot of people are on social media, but not everyone is on social media. My husband's not on social media, and he's he's very well qualified in all of those things. It's not always a question of education or anything like that. It's a question of personal choice, exactly. Yeah. So those technologies are there and they can be very useful, but I would always bear in mind that a lot of people don't use it or wouldn't. Even if they use it, they would not use it for this purpose. Having said that, there's very simple things that can be used, like hashtags for discussions, for instance. I don't know if you've discussed that here at all, but there's been a few experiments in different places where the House of Commons actually has experimented a lot with hashtags. If you look at the committee's Twitter's account, they use hashtags these days all the time. But for instance, I mean, the first time they used, I think it was to put questions to Michael Gove when he was Secretary for Education. So he was going to go there to answer questions from MPs, and the committee asked, what would you ask him? Obviously, they were inundated with lots and lots of questions, and that brings me to one of the points about this, is that resources, again, digital is an opportunity to go out there, but ultimately there's people behind it, there's ideas behind it, it's algorithms can't deal with everything. And if people submit their questions through a hashtag, that's great, but they expect them to be used and to be questioned. And to be fair to them, they did do it, and Michael Gove was presenting questions from teachers, some of them quite uncomfortable questions. Ultimately, it was an official who had spent some time to browse through all those questions, and that's happening all the time now because they're using that a lot. Another example was, which actually is relevant to local government, which you might know already about, which Ask Pickles, when Eric Pickles, and again they ask questions, and out of one of those questions, which actually could be someone tweeting about this because I know he follows your commission quite closely, he's said something about the way minutes are done in local government, and actually the law was changed about that because Pickles didn't know anything about it. So that's one example of actually something that led to a change, but more often it's being used as a way of promoting discussion. The House of Commons they now have something called the digital debates, and so digital debates are around a hashtag, around an issue, and it's a way of people to go in there and give their views on a variety of things. And for instance, with the e-petitions debates that they do, the ones that take place in Westminster Hall, they usually have a hashtag. Again, it's a way of involving other people. So that's a very simple thing to use.
How do they collate the interactions, the inputs you get through that, and turn that into something which is both valuable and manageable for policymakers?
Yeah.
Is there, in terms of resource, in terms of capacity, I suspect?
It depends in many ways how you're using it, doesn't it? If you are using it to inform a debate, like the digital debates are supposed to, so you have a discussion on Twitter, and then there's an MP who's going to lead on that debate.
Right.
And so there will be an official who will be paying attention to the hashtag, looking at topics, summarising it, and then they'll do, like they would do a pack now for MPs if they go and do a debate on something else, or if they are in a committee, they'll summarise the evidence. It's another way of summarising evidence. But there is a question of volume in there, and so it has to be thought through. It can't be just thinking, oh, it's one extra activity. In some ways it is, because maybe you wouldn't ask for evidence in a different way if you do it that way, but it does involve someone going through it. There are tools, though. I mean, there are tools dealing with algorithms that will pick up on specific topics, that will organise topics. So I'm not, as I say, I'm not a digital person at all, but I work with a lot of people who are, and I know those, I call them magic tools, do exist.
So technology is improving in a way in which you can organise and collate this information.
Yeah.
It just feels like it's the process again. Why are you asking the question? Doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, so are you doing it because actually that's a way of, as a politician, showing I'm listening, or actually do I genuinely want to know what questions people are asking? Because that's a very different.
It is,
Or is it about information?
Yes,
we want to do this. What do you think about it?
Exactly. Or I do want to genuinely know about what teachers' issues are on a specific topic, or you're just presenting yourself to answer questions to people. So it's different types of activities, isn't it, if you're doing that. Yeah. But there's also other things that digital mobile technology can do, which is just apps, apps of information, apps of engaging people, from engaging young people.
Well, it kind of sort of opens up a question that which is one that's been vexing us all to a certain extent, because often digital technologies and social media platforms, mobile technologies can help us do politics that is doing in traditional forms and digitally, so we can replicate things and we can make them, we can reach out using that. It's less clear to see how councillors can do politics differently through these platforms, and I wonder whether you have any examples of where politics and the way democracy engages with citizens is done differently due to the introduction of these new technologies.
You mean completely different?
Or just the difference in the terms of tone, of form, of structure.
Okay. Well, in some ways, it's the same thing really than the hashtags. But the European Parliament has these web chats. Have you heard anything about this? Which with MEPs. So the European Parliament uses social media very, very extensively, and their Facebook page, in my view, is the most complex parliamentary Facebook page of an institution that I know of. And they've been using it for a very long time in lots of different ways. And one thing they've had for quite a few years now is this tool, which is a web chat where they'll have an MEP, not just one, because obviously you need to have the party representation, and so they'll have a number of them, sometimes just two, sometimes it's someone, for instance, the President of the Parliament, so if it's someone, an official, and they'll have web streaming or photos showing the person there with the computer, and in real time, because what I was saying about hashtag is anyone, midnight, whatever time, then it just collected. But in real time, people have conversation questions to these MEPs. And that, in some ways, it's different because it feels more proximate, because it's in real time. It's then you can think of, I'm here in Doncaster, and my MEP is up there in Brussels now, and is actually answering this question. Now, of course, the problem with the European Parliament is that it probably isn't a British MEP. It could be a Swedish MEP. They deal with far more complexities and other difficulties, which in my view is why they do so much, because they have such issues of reaching out to people. But that tool, I wouldn't say it's very simple, because it's not. Hashtag is much more simple. That involves an operation behind it. But that is a good example of how you can promote that interaction.
We could have video cast a certain scuffle last week, possibly. We missed an opportunity there.
Oh, yes.
There's an opportunity. I mean, obviously, Kirklees is quite, in terms of area, it's the fourth largest met, and it's 160 square miles. So for some of our issues, we've got quite diverse communities. So
Yes,
actually,
yes.
I mean, we're webcasting this at the moment, but actually, in some of the areas, we could add a degree of interactivity with some of what we do. I mean, I was involved for the first time with a Skype seminar the other week, and that was just brilliant. People were very sceptical about it, but to actually see faces, and we've got people from as far down West Country and the North West and stuff.
Yeah.
So it's a degree of interactivity.
Yeah.
We do send information, make it available that way, but it's actually getting information back. So,
and I mean, that sounds like a good example of an experiment. That's what I would encourage you to do. Just experiment with different things and start small, and then go bigger and do more of them. And
but we quite often know how many people are watching a council meeting, which is about the 40s, isn't it? But actually, to them, public question time, actually to do that would be fairly straightforward to.
I mean, one of the ideas, do you remember with the Digital Democracy Commission we did an exercise with schools where they were suggesting an idea of digital tools?
Yeah.
And one of the ideas that those young people groups suggested was to have a PMQs hashtag to ask questions on the PMQs.
Yeah.
So that's one example.
Well, certainly one need to pick that up.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, indeed.
Exactly.
I think there's need a degree of moderation. That's you need the resources behind it.
You have to think about the context. So if you're going for something like that, that's quite major, and you have to think about how do you moderate that. But sometimes I actually think, and I said that earlier, that those experiments that you don't hear about actually are the most interesting ones. They're the ones actually people got engaged. The problem is you probably engage about 40 people, 100 people, and there's many other people out there.
But in terms of the quality of debate, that would be interesting to experiment with. And we've got the local plan this afternoon. We've got open public presentations. That's going to be for 2.5 hours, so starting at 3:00. It's just on the first come, first serve if people want to go. But actually, if we did widen that out, and there was some degree of moderation about what issues are people interested in. I've got geographical spread, particular questions, but then you need to develop that trust. The members of the public need to be able to trust that. But it's the same with Parliament. You've got 650 members of Parliament. They can't all speak. The Speaker is picking and choosing who comes and speaks, doesn't it? But I think we need to, there just sound like there's opportunities for us to do things a bit differently.
I come back to the point that you can't please everyone all the time by any means. And it's about also making the public understand that, and it's about conversation and giving opportunities.
We're aware. Again, Kirklees politically is quite balanced, has been for a long time. But actually, some of us, part of the process, the political debate, actually is about adding value and the fact you have that, and it's about widening it out with our community. And we, where councils have been really effective, they are representing their community's views, but also understanding that plays into the whole like strategic. That local representation influences the strategic decisions that need to be made. And perhaps there's better ways of us doing that.
Just as something that I'm going to think about in terms of digital and mobile technologies and their potential to enhance both voter registration, which is of course since IER has been introduced become an increasing issue of concern, but also in terms of voting, the process of voting, increasing voter turnout. And I wonder, during the work of the Speakers Commission, you came to any conclusions on the opportunities and potential challenges of that, moving more of that process online?
I think, again, online tools provide us another tool to encourage that process. I don't think we're at the stage yet where we think that's a solution by any means. And so there's two different things, and there's about registration and actually voting. So you can use apps, you can use a website that actually works on a mobile. I mean, that's sometimes just simple things. Sometimes it's just you build a website, but actually it doesn't work on a mobile phone. Just make it work on a mobile phone. Just be more mobile savvy. And sometimes that's about skills and about being able to recruit the best people who have those skills. So some of those things are, in some ways, are simple, but they can be a real barrier. As as a mum of a 19-year-old and a 16-year-old and a 12-year-old, I know that they have absolutely no patience whatsoever. If they click on something, it doesn't work, that's it. They're off to something else. If they click on a web page and it looks really odd and doesn't look like an app or doesn't look like something, they're off somewhere else. So you can develop good tools, that's a good principle. But also, if I think, for instance, my 16-year-old, my older son, my younger son, are quite politically aware actually, but the middle one just isn't. It's interested in other things. And you can make it the most amazing tool whatsoever, but if he doesn't feel that he should register for vote, he just won't. Why would he? He's got other things more important. His life is not about that. So I think, again, come back to the context. You can make the most amazing tools, but the context is really important. So it's about thinking, where are young people? Where are the contexts that they are? Is it college? Is it school? Is it youth community groups? And it's about involving those organisations, I think, to talk to the young people rather than just
to bring them into a network of engagement.
Yes, and to explain why it matters, why does it make a difference. Because, it doesn't cost them anything. It's more thinking, why would I even think of doing it? But then, if your mates are also registering, then they're more likely to do it. It's as simple as that. It might not be because they've got the grand desires of being involved in the country big decisions. My older one would want to. My 16-year-old just not worried about that. So I think the context is actually really, really important. And coming back to the vote, again, I don't think we are at that stage yet to just use just vote digitally. I know we do online banking, we do all sorts of things, but the vote is very different. Now, imagine the referendum vote. Imagine it be done online. Imagine there was just one rumour of being something not very. Someone has messed about with the results or something. It's just one rumour. The whole country divided. It's already been difficult as it is. If people don't trust the system, if you question the legitimacy of a national vote, that has huge consequences.
Well, the EU referendum, in fact, people took their biros in. Yes, because of cancer. Yes.
Exactly. Imagine if that had been online and there was just one rumour, one newspaper, one tabloid just saying there was impropriety, it was messed about, and suddenly the trust in the system wasn't there anymore and there was no legitimacy in the system. So I think that's really, really important. And also, and again, I come back in here to my sort of sociological roots. Again, I think the context is really important. And actually, the one change I will make, as you can see from my accent, I'm not originally British. I was born in France, I'm Portuguese, I'm from all over the place. And to me, voting is voting on a Sunday with your family. So if I would change something, I would move the voting from a Thursday to a Sunday. Why do you go and have to vote between school runs and shopping and coming back to work and all of those things? If it's a Sunday, and if it's a day where you can actually reflect about it, do your trip to go to the school or to the church or whatever it is, to vote or to the hall, and make it more special. To me, it has to be actually, it's a special moment.
A community act.
It is a community act. It's very important. It's not just about ticking a box. It's far more than that. And the legitimacy behind that is really, really important.
This is going back to our own history. One of the reasons I got involved in politics from being quite young is on polling day, the Thursday, all schools were closed. So my dad taught at the local high school. My parents were politically involved. He taught at the high school. But it was closed, despite the fact it wasn't a polling station. So I used to go and stand on, I had a holiday, I used to go and stand on polling stations, take in the polling, and was with older children, usually in older people. So it used to be a holiday. But now, you get battles with schools. Fewer and fewer of our schools are actually closed on polling day because it's a disruption to the education. Whereas at least all children used to be. I mean, we took it a long time ago now.
But that symbolic value is really, really important.
But it's making that day different, isn't it?
It's a special day. It shouldn't be. I know there's a lot of discussion about making it as accessible and as simple as possible. Okay, that's fine. But it's also a really special day. It should be. It shouldn't be just like any other day. You shouldn't go there and tick a box without, having
Like
thought like 3
not
seconds
like it.
about it. He should have thought about it, and he should be involved in that community act. I think it is a community act of empowering representatives to represent you.
So voting on a Sunday, because at workshop yesterday we were talking about perhaps that being problematic because we use a lot of church buildings as polling stations, which might be a problem on a Sunday. So how did that work, voting on a Sunday then?
Well, as I say, I don't think so. If I go back to where I used to vote, and where my family vote, we don't use churches to vote. We would vote on local councils, schools, town halls, that sort of thing. In Portugal is a Catholic country where people do go to church, so we wouldn't use church for that actually.
No.
And actually there's all sorts of issues about religion and politics in the context of Portugal. Yeah. So a lot of people would be opposed, and in France even more so. Yeah. So it's about town halls, schools, public places. But it would be
part of the day, so people might go to worship in the morning and then go and vote afterwards. Or
even if you don't worship, you might go out for lunch as a family. Lots of people go and see their mums on a Sunday or go out for Sunday. And
part of that would be going to vote.
Yeah, part of that would be go to vote. And I usually, when I'm in environments like this, I always say we're not normal people, because we're not. If we're here, it's because we've got an interest for politics. So I also had a very politically, growing up, both of my parents were very much involved in politics. I grew up in Portugal as the new democracy was developing. So all of that obviously has an effect, an impact, but you have to be realistic and thinking we're not normal. Other people don't have that experience. But the simple things like making that Sunday should be a reflection day, a day you stop, which obviously is not true for everyone because some people work, but majority of people, it's definitely more of a day where people stop and can do something together than say a Thursday.
But I think that there are other considerations. Cost is one of the biggest ones, of course, because you would have to pay people for a Sunday and whatever. It's a very interesting idea. We talked about it. I just want to, because we're running out of time slightly, and I just want to make sure that we get back to some of the concerns that came out in our public engagement. One of the things, when you go back to some digital media, has been questions about security and about the digital exclusion that you raised earlier on, the fact that there is a sizable minority of citizens that aren't wired into the virtual world politically. And I just wonder whether through your work in the Digital Democracy Commission you address how these issues can be addressed, how the council can go out to those citizens and address those concerns about security and exclusion, and how it can then be taken forward in terms of this problem of synchronisation in some senses.
Yes, I mean, we with our work, we're very much aware that some people are just they're not digitally included, let's say, or they may not have the digital literacy to do so. They might know about the internet, they might have used a computer, but they wouldn't necessarily do any activities online because they just know how to. There's also obviously issues of accessibility, like in rural areas, you don't necessarily always have a good signal to do all of those things. So there's all sorts of issues built in that. And the report actually acknowledges that and actually talks about going out to talk to specific communities. So it's not just about relying everything on digital. At the same time, it's also about developing material resources that fit different audiences. So in this case, an audience that doesn't necessarily receive everything online. There are also, one of our commissioners, Helen, she's the CEO of the Tinder Foundation, which is not the data Tinder thing, it's a foundation that works on digital inclusion, and they have lots of programs where they work with different types of age groups on building those digital skills and developing those skills, because it's also a reality that group is actually becoming more and more vulnerable because more and more people are expected to do things online. So there's also part of it of understanding the responsibility of developing those skills whilst not excluding them in the meanwhile. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, they're very useful. That sort of issue around digital skills has come up in other evidence gathering.
But there's nothing like going to see, imagine, just to talk of stereotypes, a group of 70-year-old ladies in a small village out in nowhere and who may not have the access to what you say you're discussing something this afternoon which would be very relevant for them, is to think of the context. If what you're talking in here is relevant to communities that may not have those digital links, then think differently for those communities and think about how can you connect with them. And it's very rare that one size fits all. And it's very rare that you do one thing and it fits everyone because we're all different groups.
We are in a transitional period then. It's quite clear that as a 49-year-old man, I'm not sure I'll be around to see how this fully ferments, shall we say, but it's clear that the younger generation are certainly more wired into the digital world through the smartphones, greater usage of that. It's more banal for them. They've grown up in that environment in a way that we all are of an age where we're learning about these things. Certainly when I worked for the Youth Citizenship Commission, one of the things that did come through is what you described as your own children, is that it's not that they're more digitally literate, it's they're quicker at working out what works and then deciding that works, that doesn't work, if it doesn't work, won't use it. How can you harness that connectedness? How can we harness the sense in which these networks are developing, that young people are clearly doing politics differently than previous generations because of that digital wiredness? In terms of engaging people in decision making first and foremost, particularly those that can't vote, those under the age of 18 that don't get chances to vote for me, but those over the age of 18 to 24 being the sector of the electorate that votes the least. How can we use these new technologies through smartphones particularly and other digital platforms to bring them more firmly into this process of local democracy?
Well, for a start, I would say develop tools that actually are good tools, because young people have absolutely no patience whatsoever for tools that pretend to be cool and about young people, but actually they don't work. They're just rubbish.
Or our interpretation of what young people are, which is embarrassing. Like deaf dancing at a wedding.
So it's a question of consulting with young people about what kind.
Definitely. I would involve them. I mean, you could even do a competition about that. Something that some parliaments have done is this idea of hackathons. Have you had this idea circulated here? So hackathons have become very popular, and it's partly about developing young people's digital skills, and there is a strong emphasis now on schools, which is not just about being able to use Word or Excel, it's actually about developing computer digital skills or programming and that sort of thing. Hackathons is where you have a group of people come to a room, you give them data, loads of data. So the hackathons that I know best are Parliament hackathons. And so say give them Parliament data, the data that's quite often is difficult to take out, from Hansard to whatever it is, and give them problems, accessibility to information on PMQs, or information about urgent questions, or information about dogs, puppies, whatever. And then a group of people who are digitally oriented people, that's what they most like, is to have a problem, lots of data, how to sort it out. And they create tools. And they create tools on very specific problems, very specific issues, and it's a whole day of people batting ideas with their laptops and developing specific software. And obviously it's done through 1 day, 2 days, so it might not be something very well fine-tuned and finished. If you do that with young people, and you can then develop that, and you can do competitions, say which one was the best one, which one is most likely to actually develop into a tool, and if they're involved in that, and then you could have actually people who are not part of that digital group, let's say, doing the judging and saying, actually, that would be a really good tool to use, or that one wouldn't be a good tool to use. So that's a way of involving them, and also about making the most of their skills, which sometimes actually, they're better than our skills, and they know better how to sort out. And it's about letting their creativity bring these things. So coming back to my favourite parliament example, the Brazilian parliament, just because they're very active in this area, they actually now have a full-time hackathon lab.
Oh.
They actually have a room where what we're seen as hackers, which is not the very, it's a quite pejorative sense of it, but it's people who are very good with data, with computers. And they have a permanent hackathon room. It's the hackathon lab, where these people are there working with tools and develop specific objects for them people to use. And House of Commons has done quite a few of those too, and other places have.
I can hear a couple of ears pricking up at the back of the room now. Carl and David are thinking about not in Westminster and the potential that might stream
that's
in.
perfect context. Yes, the Not in Westminster initiative is a really good one to have a hackathon type of activity.
That sounds like a very good idea.
And again, it comes back to it's about issues, about involving people, and experimenting.
That preparedness to try and fail is more important in some senses, and I think that one of the things that's rewarding about the Democracy Commission's terms is that this is not a single exercise. That the idea of this is that this is a process in itself, and that a number of pilots will emanate from the Commission itself. I'm just looking at the time, and we are running towards the end of your time. You're very kind. I just want to ask my fellow commissioners whether they have any final questions they'd like to.
I don't actually. I think we covered everything in law that I was hoping to. It's been really good.
Just Cristina, what you've said is echoed with others about around this area about processes being really important, and actually digital being a tool to enable things happening and to have the processes right. And I think that's something I think will probably be emerging out of our evidence, and it's looking at it in the wider context. So thank you, and it's been really good having a discussion around that, exploring that in quite a lot of detail. Thank you.
It has, and it has been an extremely rich session, and we always note that when sessions are extremely rich in those details that they tend to fly by, and time has flown. Very much in the spirit of what you've said, the commissioners have been very keen to make sure that anyone that's been kind enough to give their time, be it a member of the general public or stakeholders such as yourself, to come and talk to us, that we intend this to be a conversation rather than a one-off extraction of your ideas and views. We are taking evidence now until the end of October before we get locked into a dark room by Carl until we come forward with some form of a draft report with draft recommendations. We are very keen to send that to all our witnesses for two reasons. One is that you can check that we have captured your ideas and thoughts in an accurate way, and that you're very happy in the way in which we presented them. But also in terms of the recommendations itself, and we're very keen to get them some soundboard and sound tested, and to make sure this is a conversation. And we'd be very grateful if you might consider doing those.
Yes, of course. Yes.
We don't think it'll be too timely, but it enriches the process for us. And also then we go on into the new year, we will be publishing the report. It will go to full council here, but also we are going to be engaging back with the citizens of Kirklees, and on a more regional and national scale the piece of work is going to be promoted in many ways through the Political Studies Association. We're going to be looking at various things. I think also that considering your own track record, your engagement in the Not in Westminster process, I can see that we'll be coming back and talking to you about how we develop some of these pilots and working with you. I think it'd be extremely rewarding for us to do that. But for the moment, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Not at all.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Thank you.